Welcome to the webinar, Don't Get Duped Online, the Power of Mindfulness in Turbulent Times. So let's get right to it. I want to just share an author's note here at the beginning. An earlier version of this adapted content was published in Interpersonal Communication for Contemporary Living, focusing on useful strategies for managing relationships at work, at home, and at play. And also the material was supported in part by a grant from the National Institutes of Health under a variety of awards. So let's agree. Let's create some common ground. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And that's what we're going to do today. That's what today is about. Content online, relational tension via mediated communication, misinformation. You know, we can't control the nature of that content, but we can decide not to be reduced by that. And we're going to be working through that, looking at the power of mindfulness. So, as I promised in our intro and with the information that Ryan shared with you, we're going to define deceptive communication as a source of misinformation. And I'm going to ask my good friend Ryan to come on in and share this definition with you. So Ryan, can you help us out and read this definition aloud?
I certainly can try. Message distortion resulting from deliberate falsification or omission of information by a communicator with the intent of stimulating in another or others a belief that the communicator himself or herself does not believe.
All right, and this comes from Gerald R. Miller back in 1983. I love the title of this article, Telling It Like It Isn't and Not Telling It Like It Is, Some Thoughts on Deceptive Communication. So I want to extract some meaning from this quote in terms of what we're talking about and what does it mean to be deceptive? Well, deceptive communication is, bottom line, message distortion. And that means a falsification of facts, omission of facts, and an intention to manipulate. So notice here, we are talking about facts and we are talking about the intent to manipulate. Therefore, for the liar, the focus is on getting another person to believe something that the liar does not believe. But notice one of the essential features of deceptive communication is that there is some semblance or some notion of facts, either the falsification of facts or the omission of facts. And this is going to be important because we're going to compare deceptive communication, which is a type of misinformation that we see online, with another type of misinformation or content that you might be susceptible to online, you or your students, all of us really. And here it is, On Bullshit, from Harry G. Frankfurt, the renowned moral philosopher from Princeton. I don't know if you've heard of the book, but it gives this outstanding definition of what bullshit means from a philosophical perspective. It's great. And again, I'm going to recruit my good friend Ryan to share with us his wonderful rendition of this definition. What is a bullshitter? So here you go, Ryan, give it to us.
Oh, okay. When an honest man speaks, he says only what he believes to be true. And for the liar, it is correspondingly indispensable that he considers his statements to be false. For the bullshitter, however, all these bets are off. He's neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on facts at all, as the eyes of the honest man and of the liar are, except insofar as they may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. He does not care whether the things he says describe reality correctly. He just picks them out or makes them up to suit his purpose.
Exactly. Brilliant Academy Award-winning performance. I love it. All right. Very nice. So here it is. Here's the source. It's a great little book that you can find. And this is another type of misinformation that we see, especially online. And again, the bottom line with bullshit is that it is a total disregard for the facts. The focus is not on facts at all. There is no concern for facts. There is no intent really to represent reality. So for the bullshitter, the focus is on getting what they want typically, by any means necessary. The bullshitter doesn't care what is said as long as it suits their purpose. You know, a bullshitter will use terms, whatever terms, to meet the self-serving needs of the moment and basically make stuff up just to suit the agenda that is dominant in their mind in the moment. Okay, so we have this interesting juxtaposition of deceptive communication, which has some base in fact, either the falsification of fact or the omission of fact. And then we have bullshit, which has no concept of fact at all, no basis in reality. And that's why at times we're confused. So this is the state of affairs. This is what we're dealing with. And now the question becomes, what do we do? How do we move to action, right? What response can we create, and what can we do to help support our students in this type of climate? And that's what we're going to talk about right now. And I'm going to share this wonderful cartoon. So take a moment, enjoy. I think you should be more explicit in step number 2. I love that. Then a miracle occurs, right? So we're going to talk about the miracle. What is the miracle? Excuse me. And how can we make it happen? Let's talk about unmasking the miracle, excuse me, and the truth about change. Change requires us to do a variety of things that are kind of challenging. It requires us to resist our automatic reflexes and mindfully choose other alternatives, and often act in ways that are novel, the opposite of automatic reflexes, different, unusual, and sometimes frightening. That's why when you develop a new habit or you try something new, you may feel uneasy. And I like to use this metaphor of resisting the running reflex. An angry dog in a strange neighborhood. And this is a story that I love to tell that happened to my dad. And he was riding his bike in a strange neighborhood, and a dog started chasing him. And he thought, hey, I have a bike. I'm going to be able to outrun the dog or out pedal the dog. But the dog kept gaining on him. Dad did something rather counterintuitive. He stopped his bike, and he got the bike and he put the bike in between himself and the dog, okay, creating a barrier between himself and the dog. And guess what the dog did? The dog stopped. Now, if I were to venture into the mind of the dog at this moment, I might say, metal thing, big metal object in between me and prey. Stop, assess danger, right? And as the dog stopped and basically analyzed or assessed the situation in the moment, that gave enough time for the owner down the street to call out to the dog, hey, Buffy, come home, girl, to this 100-pound Rottweiler or whatever it was. The owner came, put the leash on the dog, and took the dog away. The bottom line is my dad, not the dog, my dad resisted the running reflex. He could have kept on running. He could have kept on pedaling, but he didn't. He resisted that automatic response and did something rather mindful, right? He paused, he chose, he did something that was ultimately helpful and useful by interrupting the automatic reflex, okay? And we do this all the time, right? We do this all the time. And here in this webinar, I'm basically bringing this to our attention so that we engage in this process very thoughtfully, very deliberately, especially as we engage in content online. So let's look at how we do this more specifically. If you're familiar with this model of human behavior, an SR model, which basically describes a stimulus, a cognition of some kind, or a response. The stimulus is a triggering event or a catalyst, right? So you might have triggering content. We might have the dog chasing you. That's the stimulus. Then we usually have some type of affect or cognition about it, either a thought or a feeling. And that's what I call the gap. And many social psychologists talk about that gap. Viktor Frankl's excellent work back in the day kind of talked about this idea of the gap. And then creating a response, a reply, or an action based on some type of reflection in between the stimulus and the response. That's the basic idea of what we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes by choosing something mindfully. Now, mindfulness has been talked about for, over 2,000 years, and there's all this definition or concept or conceptualization about what mindfulness is. And I want to talk to you today about this very simple model that shows how mindfulness can work for us. And I borrowed it from Freilich, a well-known psychotherapist from Maine. I did a workshop with him years ago, and he kind of shared this cool model of 4 parts: notice or pause, breathe, reflect, and choose. And notice how this builds on the idea of creating a gap or a pause by breathing and reflecting before a choice type of action, before a behavior. And what I want to do is just go through each part of this model and break down how we actually execute mindful behavior in a very real scenario. Here's the source, if you'd like to check that out. So let's look at steps 1 and 2 much more directly. Step 1 is notice or pause, bringing awareness to the negative feeling or the reaction or the negative content or the trigger as quickly as possible. And basically recognizing the early warnings of an emotional reaction or distress or overwhelm, and remind yourself, hey, this is a feeling or a reaction, and I can pay attention. This might be a feeling of anger or a feeling of anxiety or a feeling of moral indignation. Whatever that might be, I can just notice. Then the next part, which is very important, is directing attention to the breath. All right, allowing yourself a sense of breathing for a moment, right? The softening quality of the breath and letting go of any physical tension, allowing the possible negative reaction to soften, right? So we can actually do that right now if you want to play along and just and noticing the sensation of air coming into the nostril area and air coming out of the mouth, and just taking a moment to be in the body. Now, that might sound strange or silly or odd, but just think about what most of us do when we get triggered. Many times when we get triggered, we stop breathing. Almost every exercise program or every meditation program or every physical practice, from yoga to Tai Chi to Qigong, talks about the importance of the breath. When you work out, your personal trainer, if you've ever had a personal trainer, says to you, breathe, and they coach you on a breathing process to help engage the body in a useful manner, in a way that is helpful. So here are steps 3 and 4. reflect. So after breathing, we have a moment of reflection. Is this pattern a reaction? Have I seen this reaction before? What is this reaction about? What's going on here? What does this reaction say, right? We might relate it to content online. What is this content? Is this content deceptive communication? Is this content bullshit? Right? What is this content? Does this look factual? Is this just made up? Does this have any semblance in reality? These are all questions about reflection, and they cause us to pause and reflect, consider alternatives, weigh, and basically live in the mystery of the question. So then, after making this reflective process available to us, we can make a helpful choice by saying, hey, what can I do that's under my control to make a positive change? What would be helpful in this situation? What might be useful? What can I do to make things better? One thing might be not to share any content at all, right? Not to do anything. One thing might be to look at other sources, to look at the BBC, to look at what is being said on the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times, NBC, CBS, NPR, Al Jazeera, right? Checking multiple sources to see if there is a consensus of opinion around evidence that might indeed be factual, right? But that is a choice that you can make, right? Very nice. So you might say, okay, this is all really nice, and it makes sense, and I've seen this before, but what is the evidence? What do researchers say? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here we go. Here's what researchers say. This is an article that came out here in 2021, how cognitive reflection correlates with behavior on Twitter. And basically, these researchers looked at different types of traits, and one of them is cognitive reflection. And I want to share with you the gist of their findings in a really cool infographic that they put together. And I want to share that on the next slide. As social media has become dominant in our lives, right? It's a major source of interaction, political communication, commercial marketing, right? And they use a cognitive reflection test to explore the extent to which users rely on intuition, or more of a heuristic process, as opposed to analytical thinking, which is a more systematic process in making decisions. And what they found was that those persons who engage in less analytical thinking are more likely to share low quality content and low quality political misinformation and fall prey for scams and so on and so forth, as you might predict. Users who engaged with less analytical thinking tend to follow similar accounts. And furthermore, persons who rely more on analytical thinking actually tend to avoid that behavior, okay? So this has all kinds of really cool implications, looking at the benefits of cognitive reflection, which is what we just talked about in that model of mindfulness, where we pause, we breathe, we reflect, and choose. That middle portion of reflection really correlates really well with this research on cognitive reflection. And really, it's a skill that we can all develop and share with our students. The bottom line, mindfulness isn't simply something that you do on a cushion. Mindfulness is something you can do online in response to content. Mindfulness isn't something that you just do in relationships. Mindfulness is something you can do as you engage in message exchange via social media, right? So this is your part. This is your segment to share your examples. I know that many of you have, like me, been reflective in the past. And so I want you to take a moment to talk about a change that worked for you. How has reflection worked for you in the past? Can you think of a situation? I don't know if we have Dr. Shabib here on the line with us, or Michael McCarthy. If you want to unmute and kind of share your examples, think for a moment, right, of how this has worked for you in the past, or maybe how you have maybe shared your own version of this model with students. So the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Could you go back to the last slide real quickly?
This one?
Yes, yes. I just wanted to see how you were defining it again. So yeah, mindfulness is something very interesting, especially in the classroom. I find it to be very important to instill into my students, to be mindful about people around them, and also how they're communicating right now, especially online. And being a teacher online too, professor, excuse me, has made me be really mindful. I can see things in a different way when everyone's on Zoom. I can see more distractions or emotions that are being experienced. And so I think it's made me a stronger teacher because I'm recognizing those and changing and adapting my teaching strategies to fit the modality that I'm currently teaching in.
Brilliant. Exactly. So being mindful as an educator, as a professor, as a teacher, right, especially in this mediated content or context, excuse me, where we are looking at exchanging messages via Zoom and being aware of people's nonverbal displays, or being aware of how individuals are maybe in distress or not online, or not sharing their image, right? And by being aware, right, we're able to make more strategic choices that might be
Exactly.
helpful, might be more inclusive, right? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say exactly. I feel like as educators right now, more than anything, is we need to be mindful. We need to be more intentional too about how we're creating content, keeping attention. It's everything that I think we're doing right now is being mindful, and we should
Right.
be. Not necessarily everyone's doing it, but that makes those better educators too, because we need our students to be learning these materials the same way that they could face to face, but we have to be more strategic and mindful about how to go about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant. I love it. I love it. Thank you. And thank you for willingness to share your perspective. All right. Very nice. Very nice. Ryan, I can't quite see the chat function, but are we having any sharing there that you might be willing to share with me?
We have a couple questions while they're coming in, if you don't mind. Somebody
Sure.
wanted to know, is bullshitting a conscious act?
Oh, right. That's good. That's good. I think that is an empirical question at this point, right? I think some people do it quite intentionally, and then other folks do it quite mindlessly, as you might surmise, because they've gotten into the habit of creating stories that are not aligned with reality, just to get away with things, just to kind of manipulate others. So I think at times bullshit can be very thoughtful, it can be very intentional as a form of manipulation, but sometimes it's very unconscious or very mindless, simply because somebody has gotten into the habit of bullshitting their way through conversations. Wonderful. Thank you for the question. Is there another one?
At the moment, no.
All right. All right. Well, then let us move forward here. The question always becomes, how do you respond, right? What do you say exactly? So we've talked about deception, we've talked about bullshit, and we've talked about how to cultivate mindfulness. But then the question becomes, how do you respond in terms of what do you say, right? How do you structure a message that might be more supportive, might be more helpful, might be more inclusive? And that's what I want to chat with you about today, the truth about dialogue, okay? And here are some tips that we've learned through the study of conversation analysis. beliefs about something are not the same as an observable fact. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, you might want to focus on what you see, what you hear, or what you observe, or what you saw, what you heard, or what you observed, because that is a way of structuring language to talk about a belief that you have. And then you share, or you might share, an opinion, not so much as an observable fact, but a way of expressing an opinion. Instead of saying, for example, as a matter of fact, blah, 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 you might say, it seems to me. And notice how that's a statement of opinion. And then instead of saying, you never, we might try, the last 3 times you were online, or the last 3 times we were in class, or the last 3 times that we engaged each other, I noticed X, Y, and Z. And then the last example, excuse me, instead of saying, you don't have a clue about whatever, you might try, I'm starting to think that you might be angry with me, or I'm starting to think that you might be experiencing some confusion, or I'm starting to think that we're not understanding each other, or I'm starting to think that this conversation isn't headed in a productive way. And we can then be very honest. And honesty is really about clarifying, not about being brutal and, destroying someone's character. Being more honest is about being more clear, more specific, more sincere, and more authentic. So you might share your observable facts. Hey, what I saw online was a comment about X, Y, and Z. What I heard via our meeting on Zoom was that you maintained your identity private. You maintained a private identity. I noticed that, and you didn't share your screen. Is there something that I need to know, right? I'm wondering, are you upset? Are you, I don't know, are you feeling apprehensive? Is this not comfortable for you? And I ask for perspective. Am I missing something? Or would you be willing to help me understand? And I like this last part here about, am I missing something, or would you be willing to help me understand? Because those types of questions invite dialogue. They invite conversation. They invite further discourse that then amplifies the conversation and frames the conversation in a way that is more supportive, helpful, and useful. I'm not attacking you. I'm not making you wrong. I'm not making you a bad person. I'm simply asking for perspective. And I'm wondering, really, if you will join me in conversation so that together we can talk about it. All right. So I'm sure that you've heard some part of this before, or some feature of this process. And again, this is the segment of the show where you get to participate. So how can you use this process in your classroom, or with media content, or engaging your students? And before we get your remarks, I want to share a scenario, and then maybe we can hear from Dr. Samantha or Michael. So here's the scenario. So Ryan, do you want to help us out by reading that?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
What to do or say in response to an online post claiming that the COVID vaccine causes death? A, this is bullshit, which we call a daddy word in this house.
Right.
B, this post is saying stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable. C, I know that you are concerned about safety and I get the hesitation, but this message is saying things that I find offensive. Would you be willing to help me understand? Or D, nothing, no response, no reply.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so Dr. Samantha or Michael, you want to share your perspective? How might you respond here, or how might you coach your students to respond in a way that might be most useful? What do you think?
Okay, so this has happened because of COVID going on and teaching. Um, And I taught persuasion last semester too. So very interesting time with the political election in addition to a global pandemic. Definitely something more along the lines of C is probably the better way to handle this. But what I try to do is really show arguments about things on both sides of the equation, right? So both sides of COVID vaccines causing deaths or not, and really trying to construct those arguments and get them to understand like good research too, and finding the right facts and making their own judgments then off of that, right? I'm not here to change your beliefs about anything. I'm here to teach you how to think smarter. And so in that instance of something like this, I would try to really have my students dig deeper into the research to provide evidence for their statements on things or their stances or positions.
Beautiful, exactly. So here you are attempting to the best of your ability in the crazy context of our world to have students understand the power of critical thinking. And here we're really talking about critical thinking in the form of mindfulness. That's what this webinar is about. That's what we're talking about
Right.
today, looking at, hey, what evidence is out there? What different perspectives can I use to form an educated opinion based on the facts that are available, right?
Right. And, someone in the chat, I do want to mention, had said that the word offensive is a little bit of a hot word, and that could not be more correct. But we have to remember too, like, meaning of words are in people, not the words themselves. We create meanings of words. So I probably would have phrased that portion just a little different. But if I had to choose, mutually exclusively from these. But yeah, I mean, that's what I try to do is get my students to really research and understand. And right now that's also a hot topic, so to say, because people don't know exactly what to believe, what messages
Right.
to believe, what stats are true or not. And so, but it's that critical thinking and coming up with your arguments. And so that's how I would, approach it.
Yeah, exactly. And I put that word offensive there for a reason, because I figured it would be a trigger that then we could potentially talk about. So brilliant, right? Exactly, exactly. So even the word offensive in and of itself can be a trigger, which gives us another opportunity to say, pause, reflect. Okay, the word offensive, what is this about? How is this arising? Why is this coming up for me? Where is this coming from? It's just a word. Is somebody really trying to trigger me? Maybe not. And in this process of pausing, noticing that trigger around the word offensive, it gives me another opportunity to practice that mindfulness practice and then
Yeah.
arrive at a process of, kind of understanding awareness and make a thoughtful choice instead of reacting automatically.
Yeah. And I probably would have just like rephrased it to be like, but this message is saying things that other people might not agree with. So would you
Right.
be willing to help those people understand your situation more? Because this was happening a lot in my persuasion class. And especially with the political attention too.
Yes.
So, and my students all reflected back on student evals and said the way that I was able to handle the conversations, between two very different political views in the classroom was kind of insane to them. What they said, we thought this would be so hostile, but I was like, because I'm not trying to change your belief, right? Let's build arguments and make rational arguments for things using data, right? Using actual things that are out there that are true and scientifically true, or things that were actually done, not just tweets or something like that. And
Right.
so it's just a great way to kind of, adjust the communication to make people not feel offended either, but
Right.
also make it more open and in a general sense.
Exactly. 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 So is there another comment or another person wanting to share?
Well, I was going to ask a question, but I think Dr. Shabib just sort of answered that for me in terms of looking for some language to address students who are presenting opinions as facts and will use their sources that they deem highly
Right.
qualified, credible sources for those facts in classroom discussion. And I'm trying to figure out a way to navigate this new world that we're operating in as professors. How do I address the opinions versus fact piece while still encouraging participation, not allowing other students to feel uncomfortable? And I think she just provided some helpful language for that. But if you have any other thoughts, I would love to hear them.
Yes, I think that that Dr. Shabib had given us, really good, really good framework of, okay, well, let's look at what the data say. Let's look at this study. Let's look at the research. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at multiple sources of evidence. In persuasion, we talk about multiple arguments from multiple sources being very persuasive. And that's what I would suggest, right? So let's look at the evidence. Let's look at source A. Let's look at source B. Let's look at source C. What are the arguments saying, and what is the consensus position on this issue, whatever the issue is? But to me, that is a really good strategy. Hey, forget about my opinion. Let's just look at the data. Forget about what I, Dr. J, want to say. Let's look at what the research says, and let's look at the massive or the majority of the data and what the majority of the data are saying and what the majority of the data are pointing to. And that would be my best recommendation. Does that make sense, Amy?
Yes, it does. That's very helpful. Thank you both.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Also
Sure.
another.
Yes, that may be the case that you are actually framing it that way. My name is, I'm Dr. Valerie Small. I'm Valerie Small, and I teach public speaking. I also teach communications, interpersonal communications, and human relations. So when I look at C, and in the climate that we are in, Dr. Rodríguez, and we're talking about equity and inclusion, even if that word offensive was put in there, from whose perspective are you saying is offensive? Because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we bringing in all platforms now, people and students with different backgrounds, and I'm specifically now going to talk about people of color, former, African Americans, people from African descendants, they experienced a strong, let's put it this way, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Tuskegee.
Yes.
Let me just get to the point. When we talk about this and we're bringing this in with COVID and vaccines, people of color have a history of the government not being truthful, and as you just said, doing a lot of bullshit.
Yes.
Here about the vaccines, this is what raised that red flag right there. Okay. Now, I'm not knocking science and all of that. I do believe that, and we can trust it, but we have to also consider,
Right,
the background and the perception of our individuals in the classroom.
Yeah.
So when you put that offensive in, it sounds as if for me, it sounds if we would be insensitive to inclusion, to use even that as as a platform. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. So, this is a very important issue of bringing in those voices of the concern, right? About, hey, look, these are legitimate issues, and people have reservations for valid reasons, right? You just mentioned it, the history of it, right? And I think just saying that, right, just brings the temperature down, where you say, hey, I hear that's a valid concern, right?
Yes.
That's a real issue, because there's certain communities that have been marginalized and oppressed for centuries, and there's a history of distrust, of deception, of bullshit that now we need to address to the best of our ability for the collective well-being of everyone. And that then creates an opportunity to forego bullshit and
Mhm.
actually have a freaking conversation, the conversation nobody wants to have, right?
Yes,
Which is,
exactly.
not what we're intending to do. We're not going to solve all the world's problems here in this webinar, but I'm glad you brought that out, because then this is an opportunity for us to at least broach that conversation, have a moment of honesty, and have a
Yes.
sharing of perspective. So thank you, Dr. Small. I really appreciate
Thank you.
that.
You're welcome.
All right, let me continue here, because I want to just, this is kind of a wonderful space as we're running out of time here. And again, I want to just thank all of you that felt like you wanted to participate, because sometimes, people are a little apprehensive or they don't want to say anything. So I want to thank all of you that voiced your opinions. I'm very, very grateful for that. Just one final note as we end here. An earlier version of this content was published in Interpersonal Communication. This research or presentation was partially connected to the National Institutes of Health under a variety of awards. And again, I just want to send a message of gratitude to all of you that spent your time with us. I want to thank you for all that you have done in the past. And I want to thank you for all that you're doing in the present, and really thank you for what you will be doing in the future. I thank you, your students thank you, the community thanks you, and I'm very grateful. We're all grateful for the work that educators are doing throughout the country. It's a very daunting task. And I hope that we have answered some questions, or at least provided spaces for dialogue on very central issues related to mindfulness and how we might use that in the classroom. So again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Have a wonderful rest of the semester, and hopefully you'll join us next time we have another webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jose. This was outstanding. Really invigorating conversation. I've learned a lot. I know our attendees have learned a lot. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
A final note, we host informational webinars like this on a regular basis. So I encourage you to visit kendallhunt.com/events to learn more. In the coming days, you'll receive a copy of this recording, the handout that Jose put together with tools to cope with relational distress, and contact information. Jose is very active on Twitter. He has his Twitter handle there. Let's keep this conversation going on Twitter. Thanks for joining us, and I hope everyone here has a great week, and stay safe out there.
All right, take care.